Welcome to the Reinventing Education podcast, a podcast for teachers, parents, and students who are interested in reinventing education. I'm Rob McLeod. On this episode, we speak with Kateryna Yasko. Kateryna is a Ukrainian educator, psychologist, and trainer. She has been a passionate follower of Ken Wilber's integral theory and has trained with world-renowned developmental psychologists, scholars, and practitioners, such as Bill Torbert, Suzanne Cook-Greuter, Terry O'Fallon, Ben Sagante, Don Beck, and many others. She is founder and director of the NGO International Institute for Integral Development, training and consulting company U Integral, and educational initiative EMPATIA.PRO. She is passionate about bringing an integral approach and non-violent communication to Ukrainian education, in particular to the professional development of teachers. As a mother of 3 preschool and school children, she actively supports initiatives for reforming secondary education in the Ukraine and implements educational projects working with school leaders, teachers, psychologists, and parents. Kateryna, thank you very much for taking the time to join Brendan and I this morning. It's really nice to have the opportunity to speak with you again.
It's my honor and pleasure to be with you guys today.
There are so many things that I'm fascinated about within your work. I think one of the most striking things about you is how the work you're doing in education is really tied to where you are. You're in the Ukraine, you're in Kiev, and perhaps we could start with talking a little bit about the context of some of the social factors that are occurring right now in the Ukraine and how you're seeing this as like an opportunity for a radical change in society in the Ukraine and how education might be connected to that. There's about 1 million things we could discuss there, but maybe just let's begin, maybe informing some listeners on the current context of what's going on in the Ukraine right now.
Yeah, thank you very much, first of all, for this opportunity to speak about these issues. Ukraine is going through a very difficult time, and short historical overview, okay? After the Soviet Union was split into many countries after Perestroika, Ukraine has taken a path towards independence. However, it's been faced with a lot of difficulties, both political and economical, and few attempts of coming back to the authoritarian regime, basically. And one of these attempts, basically the last one, happened in 2013, and the Ukrainian nation didn't allow it to happen by going out to the streets and making the revolution of dignity happen. In 2013, 2014, 3 to 4 months in a row happened what we call the revolution of dignity, where about 1 million of people were standing on the street in Kiev in what is called Maidan, or the Square of Independence, which is quite near to where I am at the moment, quite close, and making their choice for more pro-European than Russian orientation. After the Revolution of Dignity and after the President Yanukovych, who was basically the one who was more Russian-oriented personality and coming from the eastern Ukraine, after he left the country, he escaped. The new government came, and there was a lot of hopes that Ukraine will make quick and effective steps towards um, integration with the European Union and economic and political reforms. Unfortunately, it happens very slowly, much less effectively than it was expected. And the main problem that we see at the moment, we as, let's call it, both social activists and at the same time people who work with developing leadership capacities and bringing integral into preparing better leaders. We see it, this crisis as leadership crisis. At the same time, a lot of good things have happened since then. And one of these things is the reform of education. In 2017, the new law was accepted. And this is the law that was developed by a number of NGOs together with the government and together with the first business initiatives in the field of education. The problem in Ukraine, as well as in many other Soviet countries, is that the number of private schools or alternative schools, till 2016 in Ukraine, it was like less than 0.5%. Can you imagine? Which means that no fresh air was coming into education, notwithstanding the fact that the country has made its first steps towards democracy and more liberal, let's say, regime many years ago. So we see in the reform of education the breakthrough for the whole political and social and economic system. And in the concept that was developed by the Minister of Education with these public-private partnerships, it's called the concept of New Ukrainian School. We see totally new principles and values that are brought up to surface. And the main principle of the New Ukrainian School is the pedagogy of partnership, which is basically the shift of paradigm for us. I would like to remind you that from the spiral dynamics perspective, the whole society here in Ukraine goes at the moment from like there are different strata, but from blue to orange, and some little part, about 5%, is in green. So from orange to green. And what is beautiful phenomenon that I personally love to observe, that these 5% of people who are creating this green minority, and at the same time the number is growing, the first question that they ask themselves, or one of the first questions, is how to educate children, because this is such a deep need to contribute and to give the best care to our children. And we see that the revolution of dignity, it doesn't happen on the street within 3 or 4 months. It's an evolution of dignity in a way. And this evolution of dignity is happening through education. And these new alternative and private schools that are emerging on the whole educational market, let's say, they are the first places that manifest this new consciousness, new stage of development, totally new mindset stands behind it. And the law has given a lot of opportunities for liberalization of education, which means that homeschooling can take place. As I mentioned, alternative schools like Waldorf, Montessori, or whichever other paradigm of course, the private education, although it's not supported by the government, but at least the licensing process is much easier. It's saying this, I can imagine how strange it may seem to people listening to this in the Western world, since you have gone through this processes so many years ago. And for Ukraine, it's something totally new. So these are the few words about the context, and I would love to hear what is that you're most curious about.
Yeah, there's two things that really jump out to me there. One being that often we talk about education as a way of maintaining the society or the structure as it is. And I would say that that's more often the case in general in the sort of Western schooling mindset, that if school is kind of influenced by the kind of blue, or we've kind of used the term like a self-disciplined approach to school, or the orange kind of ambition center to school, or even the kind of emerging green sensitivity based approach to school. It's kind of like what we're doing in school is what we're wanting to have maintained in our society. What seems to be interesting here is that you're kind of describing that the Ukraine is beginning to alter the school system itself to make changes and to start to see more of these values in society. You've mentioned that there's been some changes to the systems and the structures that are allowing alternative schools, more private schools. What other structural changes do you see happening right now in the Ukraine that are allowing education to have more of an impact on society?
I would say the main change is the number of educational initiatives itself. It grows like mushrooms in the forest in early autumn. It's beautiful to see how people are gaining the entrepreneurial skills and are going into education, understanding that this could be a business. This is also something completely new for this part of the world, because the government has been having the only monopoly for education since 1919. So basically after the Russian Empire collapsed and the Soviet Union emerged in the beginning of the 20th century, the government has always been having the only monopoly for education. So what we observe here is that the number of NGOs that are providing, that are lobbying the new initiatives, it has grown immensely since 2014, after the Revolution of Dignity, and the number of business initiatives has grown immensely. Also, what we can see, very interesting, one of the problems at the moment with the whole educational setup in Ukraine is that, yes, we want new schools and new paradigms of education, but there are still no ways to prepare teachers in a totally new paradigm. They are still prepared only by the governmental institutions. And then people have to go through, 1 or 2 years of either downshifting or totally new ways of preparation in order to take away this, I don't want to call it trash, but at the same time, yes, totally discipline-oriented approaches, since this is the paradigm the government is still living in the domain of education, and to move into more ambition and sensitivity as values for that we offer children in class. So at the moment, there is a big initiative around letting NGOs prepare teachers. And the government is struggling with this part of liberating the educational market. They are still not ready, but we expect in the next year that it will happen.
Is it clear what their largest concerns are?
Of course, the quality and the control over the standards to be met. But at the same time, what is happening is that we see that, the difference between, if I may say, Russia and Ukraine, because very often we are compared and thought as still something similar in terms of the nation's mindsets. The difference is that in Russia, there is a very powerful government and very weak society. And in Ukraine, there is a very strong society and very weak government. So society is taking more and more as a self-responsibility and self-sufficient entity to decide for itself. It brings a lot of instability and chaos because it's really hard to see clarity if you function this way. You would really want to lean on some norms and regulations, and that's why the government can be useful. But when it is so obsolete and basically helpless, society takes responsibility. And the first steps and the first reform that seems like it can be very sufficient and effective, or at least we would like to imagine this as effective. We will see how it goes in a few years. It's the reform of education. Basically, people just take responsibility for the future of their children and the nation as a whole. And through creating more educational initiatives. Mm-hmm.
You seem quite optimistic that in the near future there will be a tipping point here. What feedback from the community, from the culture, from the people, what feedback is beginning to change the government's perspective or change their openness to these new ideas?
I see people very inspired, very optimistic, traveling a lot to different places to see different experiences abroad, how people manage schools, how different kind of schools function, get this inspiration and bring it to Ukraine. At the moment, the non-governmental sector is extremely influential. I mean, NGOs and businesses, like small businesses in the field of education. And if we speak about the new Ukrainian school, the concept, the document itself, and the law, it was created together. So there are a lot of challenges with the quality, in fact, and with the new standards and how to measure. My idea and my vision is that it is extremely important in order to go to healthy green and healthy, whatever, whole or integral approach to education. This orange or ambition, attainment and achievement parameters, they also have to be very well built. This is the crucial changes at the moment to create new quality standards, to combine the pedagogy of partnership, like sensitivity in the class from both the teachers and students, and to cultivate it. And at the same time to have ambitions. if the whole education system is moving from blue self-discipline to orange ambition-based, then we cannot really go into green sensitivity without having this block implemented. And so this quality control issue is extremely challenging for both the government and the new educational initiatives that emerge.
Maybe you can give us an idea or examples from your own experience as a child who came through the Ukrainian education system. What did you experience, and what are some of the current challenges facing schools now for a student in 2018 to meet those quality standards or ambition? What kinds of things are starting to happen that weren't present when you were in school?
Actually, very easy to comment on this because I'm also a mother of 3 children, and all 3 of them are studying in kind of new paradigms in comparison to educational paradigms. I mean, in comparison to what I've experienced in my childhood. I've been studying in a very good, like from social perspective, good, there's good schools that are considered to be good, and there is a queue that you have to wait until they get you in. And it was a totally blue, self-discipline oriented school with very concrete parameters of what it is to be a good student or a good person. With certain history, my school was created in 1901, so it's more than 100 years of traditions, with a museum inside the school, etc., and honoring these traditions every year. Now what we see, like my children are going to, one is going to a typical private school and another one is going to a typical alternative school, and the third one is 5 years old, so he's still in the preschool, but he will of a very also alternative type of preschool, and he will join one of the alternative schools soon. So there is much more green sensitivity in it. The whole space is completely different. I couldn't ever imagine in our school where I studied to have, for example, a place for rest or for reading or for just spending time with friends without the pressure of having to do something. It wasn't part of the culture. You are in school to study. So not much space for creativity or for example, if there was a conflict, nobody could ever imagine that we can use mediation as a means to solve a conflict, because there is right and wrong answers. And you have to address either the teacher or a principal and get, what is right. Here, it's much more liberal. I'm really happy to see that more and more people with inner maturity are coming into schools. Like totally different mindset of the teachers who are coming to schools because this is the vocation that they want to follow. And it could happen only after this new law of education on education was accepted by the parliament. Otherwise, it wasn't possible. You cannot come to and teach it, and if you do not have the pedagogical education. And unfortunately, to the pedagogical institutions, only like people with the lowest achievements and lowest ratings, academic ratings, could enter, because all the rest, like in all kinds of developing economies, people are immediately going to study economics or law or political sciences, but no one goes to learn pedagogy, to become a teacher, because if you're a teacher, you're a loser. You cannot sustain your family. The average salary in Ukraine of a teacher is $150.
And that's per week, per month?
This per month. It's in a governmental system of education.
Wow.
But in the alternative schools, you have the chances to earn more, and at the same time, the new approaches to co-financing these initiatives emerge. What usually happens in the green paradigm is that people become much more honest and whole in terms of money issues. They're linking money with the energy they want to contribute, and it becomes much easier to co-finance and to co-create.
Yeah, and anytime we've met and just hearing you speak now, your passion and your drive and fire and spirit for this come through full force. I think we should move into some of the work you're doing as an influencer, and both from the NGO standpoint with the International Institute for Integral Development, and also Integral, the consulting company you're involved with. Could you give us some insight into some of the work those two organizations are doing to impact these massive changes in the Ukraine?
What happened after the Revolution of Dignity is that the whole bunch of let's say social activists of different background, people coming from different domains, let's say both business and education and others, they started to think on how we can contribute, what can we do. And it's really about this doing energy. Sometimes you do not think much whether you have enough background and track record. It feels like it's the time to act. And I created an NGO called International Institute for Integral Development. And my idea is to contribute by bringing integral and also one very important methodology that I see extremely powerful and adding a lot of value to integral, which is called nonviolent communication. And I know I have friends in the integral community who also consider it a very valuable tool, like Armin Zieber. I've been listening to his podcast with you recently, and he's a dear friend, also visited Ukraine. So I've created this NGO, and my idea was to create the alternative professional education for teachers and school leaders based on integral approach. Since 2016, we have carried out 3 programs, 1 program per year. We have got some support from the Lithuanian and Swedish governments. We have received funds, and we've started to invite people from abroad, experienced practitioners like Armin, and like other friends from this NVC community, to come and teach Ukrainian educators the new skills that might help to like bring all three of these perspectives together, like self-discipline, ambition, and sensitivity. Of course, with the focus on sensitivity, the reason for this is the whole country, the whole nation was extremely traumatized after the recent events, the war in the eastern Ukraine. Just few words of the context. After the Revolution of Dignity, part of the Ukrainian territory was annexed by Russia. It was the Crimea Peninsula, and massive military actions started in the eastern Ukraine. At the moment, this part of the Ukrainian territory is also occupied, and basically Ukraine lost 1/4 of its territory since 2013. Due to these events, a lot of people were deeply traumatized. There are a lot of internally displaced people from the eastern Ukraine. So almost every school in Ukraine had to accept about 5 to 7% of new children coming from the eastern Ukraine. And it created a lot of social pressure. The worldviews are very different. For example, in Western Ukraine and the Eastern Ukraine, there is a lot of diversity in both political and social viewpoints. And the tension is very high. So we decided that the first thing we would like to do is to bring to teachers the new skills that might help them manage this diversity. And this is nonviolent communication and mediation. I consider this even a little bit more important than giving the theory on integral, although this also was very, very helpful. So we created long-term programs. We selected people from all over Ukraine with a focus on Eastern Ukraine, with those on those regions that are the closest to the zone of anti-terroristic operation, what we call. And so far, about 15 practitioners have been coming as trainers to teach. Just few insights after 3 years of that kind of work. I think combining integral, spiral dynamics, and also the leadership maturity framework by Bill Torbert, David Rook, and Suzanne Cook-Reuter, with mindfulness and nonviolent communication brings outstanding results in terms of professional development of teachers. One of our alumni is now in top 10 of best Ukrainian teachers of the year. The results we will know tomorrow. The big context is still happening, and it's all broadcasted on TV. And this is the person who, her name is Svetlana Stelmach, who got absolutely in love with Integral and NBC. And now she's, through her, we see the impact of this knowledge on the life. We observe deep changes in people. We've did our best to create also some supporting structures so that they would continue. Some self-learning and peer learning has been happening even after the program came to an end, 1-year program. There is a community at the moment of around 200 people who are deep into these topics and who have created their own educational initiatives, who are sharing this knowledge in their regions all over Ukraine. I suppose I cannot measure it, unfortunately, since it's very expensive. But I suppose all of these people has grown at least one level.
Yeah, it sounds like you're describing that there needs to be a new kind of teacher in order to have this new kind of education to serve the new kind of Ukraine. And you've mentioned some of these programs, the nonviolent communication, focus around mindfulness and including elements of integral, spiral dynamics, these kinds of things. Are there certain qualities you see that Ukraine needs from teachers to develop maybe where you believe the Ukraine is going or needs to go?
Well, social intelligence and emotional intelligence are probably the main qualities that give access to further learning and development. I think they have to be integrally informed. It helps a lot to manage diversity, to understand also the requests they're getting from parents. And these parents are coming from totally different paradigms of thinking.
And probably completely different understandings of what school should be.
Exactly, since everyone has a background and these backgrounds are very different. And when you are going through such a deep social and economic and political crisis as we are in, it's extremely important to be able to manage these complexities through your emotional and social skills. So that probably should be the first. And I think it's not about just Ukrainian teachers. I assume it's for everyone. One of the trainers in our projects is Pranjala Das, a dear friend. She's from India and now working in Dubai. She's been the school principal in a school where 2,300 children from 83 countries study. In my view, a totally like teal or I don't know, turquoise, alchemical type of leadership is needed in order to manage that kind of complexity and diversity. And that's what we're trying to teach our teachers and our school leaders. Second would be totally new leadership skills. And this is something very challenging because people used to be obedient. That was something that is required from you to be a good member of society. This collectivism that is coming from the blue paradigm also. Now to believe that you are the one to change your class, your school, your region, your country, it's also a paradigm shift for many. People start to believe in themselves, that they can have impact. And I think this kind of leadership trainings are extremely important for people from this kind of regions where trauma has been, big part of our reality. In Ukraine, can you imagine during the last 100 years? So the First World War happened, then the famine of 1933, then the Stalin's repressions where people were moved to Siberia, and actually all the elite was exterminated. Then the Second World War, and Ukrainians and Belarusians were people who died, like the number of people from these two countries was the biggest part of the victims of the Second World War. Then it was another famine in 1945-46, just after the war. And then it was Chernobyl, which is 130 kilometers from here. And then it was Perestroika. And then it was the first revolution, which is called Orange Revolution, and then the Revolution of Dignity and the war in the Eastern Ukraine. The reason why I'm telling this is that, can you imagine the trauma that is in the genes of the whole nation? And of course, it teaches to be resilient and survive in any circumstances. But still, it doesn't teach to be creative and to take leadership and to believe in yourself that you can create impact. So I think that this kind of skills that I just mentioned, the emotional resilience, emotional intelligence, the social skills, are most crucial for people for nations who went through this kind of experiences.
Yeah, and it's incredible to see the role that schools can play when there are people like yourself and many others who are addressing that, hey, for the Ukraine, not only has there been trauma, we need to identify this trauma, acknowledge it, and bring it onto the table and actually approach this as a society, as a culture, as the people here. That's a remarkable role that I don't think I've heard mentioned anywhere else in any school system, that this is something our school system needs to be a part of addressing.
Absolutely. And I think it's our obligation as teachers and as parents, and of course as leaders, to acknowledge this, it's a shadow material that we have to bring to the table and say, this is our main duty, and this is our obligation in order to contribute in the best way to the future of our children. We have to destroy this chain, this samsara circle, whatever you call it. Otherwise, we will continue to create enemy images inside the society and also towards our neighbors. And I think what the phase that we're going through in terms of our relationships with our neighbor, well, our main neighbor, Ukraine, in a way, is kind of a buffer between, the Western world and Russia. It's very much about self-responsibility, about not feeling the victim anymore. It's also about the collective shadow that we have to work through. It's about taking responsibility for our future and at the same time acknowledging the trauma and dealing with it.
That's beautiful that Ukraine has you on their side and so many others to face this. We did speak about the International Institute for Integral Development. Can you give us some insight into what the consulting company U-Integral is also doing?
Yeah. I'm fortunate to have my husband, Vytautas Bučiūnas, beside. He is a very powerful teacher and trainer and leader. He's been working in the business and banking sector for many years. And after we moved to Ukraine, he was very determined to help local leaders. And his mission is about bringing integral into leadership development in business, possibly in politics, And he and I have created this training and consulting company, U Integral. You as Ukraine, you as you, you also as you theory, or theory U by Otto Scharmer, that we enjoy a lot learning. Even now at the moment, he's working in the Deloitte Academy as a lecturer, speaking about integral and stages of maturity. The mission of U Integral is to help create critical mass of leaders with transformative capacities in order to enable systemic changes in society that would lead to unfolding human potential. And he and I, when I'm not dealing with educational projects, which is obviously my priority, we do our best to also focus on helping impactful leaders from different domains, business and media as well, in fact, to bring new perspectives into their own development. Vitas is also a certified Integral Coaching Canada coach, and the first one in Ukraine. And I really enjoy seeing and hearing from people who went through this long-term coaching programs and organizations who have benefited from the long-term programs that we've been, mostly he, but also when I joined, me as well, offering them. They say on the collective level, many things change. And of course, we're sad that there are only two of us. We wish there could be an army of people and locals who would be able to, together bring what is so needed. At the same time, we're happy that we have a lot of helpers. There is a whole family of integral friends who are coming from time to time to Ukraine and helping by participating in the projects that we do. And big thanks to all of them who will hear it. And I hope that you will have Europe also one day. Since we already talked about it, I remember during the previous Integral conference.
Yeah, I would love to see what's happening there in person for sure. Mm. Yeah, Brennan, maybe we can invite you in on here. I feel I could continue asking questions for another hour or so, but yeah, what have you picked up on here?
No, that's really, really interesting to hear, because I'm not an integral theory kind of person. That's one of the things me and Rob kind of play up a little bit, that he's the integral guy and I don't know anything about this stuff. So I may ask you a few context questions about that, because we've tried to put forward in this podcast very much the main kind of paradigm in, say, British Canadian schools is kind of the ambition orange paradigm, and that's often we've portrayed that in really quite a negative way, and it's really quite interesting to hear you really describe that in a very positive way, about how the changes that have brought ambition into the school system have really kind of pushed or begun to push the system in what we would say is the right direction. Could you just, I guess what really struck me was you seem incredibly patient, because myself and Robert are already like, come on, let's get through this orange and into some kind of like green sensitivity, and let's get past this so we can all get this kind of holistic teaching. What kind of time scale are you kind of hoping that the Ukraine moves more into a kind of sensitivity green kind of paradigm as the mainstream? Do you see that at all anytime soon, or yeah?
Yeah, thanks for asking. A very interesting question. It seems to me that in countries like Ukraine, where there are some white and black swarms, happening from this perspective. I think maybe something can be quite illogical. What I would like to emphasize is that the green sensitivity, it's in a way, it's absolutely important for learning. And I hope that, speaking about the alternative schools, it's growing in a very speedy pace, in a very quickly way. And since the number of alternative and private schools are growing. At the same time, speaking about the governmental system, I think it will take from 5 to 10 years to really integrate sensitivity into this paradigm. But I'm trying to figure out whether we are on the same page with this understanding of orange. The focus of the new Ukrainian school is competence-based approach. And this is kind of an orange term, meaning ambition, attainment, achievement term.
Yeah.
At the same time, the main principle is pedagogy of partnership. So it's an attempt to combine both and to squeeze it into one reform that will be taking place for 10 years. Whether they will make it or not, or we will make it or not, I don't know. It seems to me that there is a big chance that it is possible. My challenge from more like not educational, but more, overall social view of the country, I see huge immigration. People are leaving the country. And I assume that it's very important to prepare the whole, pool of human capital with new skills, and at the same time, new kind of vertical maturity. I'm sorry for using this integral jargon. At the moment, without creating solid achievement measurement systems and competence measurement systems, because we're moving now only from knowledge to competences. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So without creating this at the governmental level, I don't know whether Ukrainians could be competitive at the international market.
Yeah, of course, it is generational, potentially.
Exactly, but how, in a simple words, how I see it, if we get a child from US or Britain, an 11 years old, a 6th grader, and a child from Ukraine, from the competence perspectives, unfortunately, the Ukrainian child will be much less competitive. And I'm not saying that they have to be compared or have to compete. At the same time, if we're looking at the PISA, standards and etc.
And just to be clear, for people who are maybe not familiar, PISA being the standards where we compare countries all across the world in literacy competencies, science competencies, these kinds of things.
Yeah. Exactly. So only from this year, Ukraine will participate in the PISA assessments. And I assume that we won't be in the first 50 states. What means that in order to create competitive and internationally competitive human capital, we have to introduce this achievement and attainment and ambition-based of education. And this is needed at the governmental level.
I just want to pause there. Brennan, can you pause your or mute your audio if you're not speaking? There's just a lot of background sound there. Sorry, Kateryna, could I get you just to go back like 2 sentences? I'll edit this part. But.
Mm-hmm. So now for the Ukrainian government, the main challenge is how to create the standards for assessment. Students, schools, teachers, leaders as well, where both achievement and ambition and sensitivity, like the well-being part, could be integrated. And I think that we can get a lot of experience from countries like United Arab Emirates, for example. I'm not speaking about Singapore, but really, because I know beautiful things are happening there, but I know much deeper Dubai, and I also visited their Knowledge and Human Development Authority, which is the part of the Ministry of Education that is responsible for guiding the private schools. And in Dubai, there are 91% of private schools out of all the schools in the country, in the emirate. And in other emirates, it's something similar. So what they did is they integrated the paradigm of happiness and well-being into the school standards. So each school is assessed both in terms of academic achievement, and in each diary, the child from the first grade they have the goals, where the Dubai aspires to be by 2021 in PISA, in teams, in the World Happiness Report, because their ambition is to be among top 5 countries in the World Happiness Rating. So like they're combining and they're assessing it, and they're, from this orange paradigm, they're also saying what cannot be measured doesn't exist. So they're giving these assessments to parents and to leaders and to teachers and to the school personnel and to students, and more than 90% report that they're happy at school. In this way, they combine ambition and sensitivity and self-discipline, which is extremely important. So I'm wondering, as a leader and of my organization and social activist, which countries should we learn from the most? Should it be Finland, or should it be, for example, Dubai, the country, or United Arab Emirates as a whole? Since 45 years ago, it was a desert. And today, they're one of the top performing countries in the world. And Martin Seligman, one of the founders of positive psychology and this happiness in education paradigm, is the one who is consulting them at the governmental level in order how to bring sensitivity and avoid learned helplessness, and to bring optimism into school, so that children will get, and teachers will inherit certain qualities that will help them in the future. and how to become the 21st century learners. So we are learning a lot from them, and I'm inviting people from Dubai in order to share. And I enjoy a lot this experience because Ukraine doesn't have time. Finland or Norway or Sweden, these are the countries, especially Sweden, they didn't have a war since, if I remember correctly, 1812. It was the last war that they had here in Ukraine near Poltava, the Poltava battle. They have been evolving in a very natural, peaceful way as a society. So they went through certain stages and they created a very inclusive education. And of course, they have their challenges and we learn from them as well. However, we do not have this time. We have to integrate the best of what exists in the world in order to make a breakthrough, in order to be compatible at the world market.
Yeah, that was a great answer. And what is kind of highlighted is a lot of the people we've spoken to had similar ideas of that we moved into this orange paradigm out of necessity, and it's really, really hard to move out of it. Because when we began measuring things, and in Britain particularly, there's a real obsession with measurement of everything. And as you say, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist in this particular paradigm. We're finding it really, really difficult to move beyond that, because as we introduce sensitivity, we still want to measure it in the same way. And so we want to, as you're saying, we bring it into the curriculum, we bring it into the assessment, but it's so difficult to measure in any kind of meaningful way that we're really, really trying to tussle with this answer. And that's one of the big themes, I think, in myself and Rob's discussions. So it's good to know that we're working on this idea together. And hopefully we will find more and more ways to integrate that those sensitivity ideas into our day-to-day kind of life, and find a way to measure them meaningfully. I'd like to hear, if possible, a little bit more about nonviolent communication and possibly how I could bring that into my own practice, into my own school. We, of course, have our practices for mediating differences and working with students to work through their problems. But yeah, could you just give me a little bit more of an overview of that?
Yeah. Nonviolent communication is a beautiful methodology that was created by the American psychologist Marshall Rosenberg in the early 60s of the 20th century. Since then, Marshall has been working in about 40 countries, mediating conflict, also in very hot spots like Israel and Palestine, and African conflict like Rwanda and many others. He has created International Center for Nonviolent Communication, and so far there are a lot of followers and trainers that are certified by this organization that help bring NVC into different kinds of structures. And this is mostly business and education. Nonviolent communication has been extremely popular here in Ukraine after the war or the conflict in the eastern Ukraine has started. My mission, as I saw it just after the Revolution of Dignity, is bringing NVC to education. So nonviolent communication is an approach that offers bring sensitivity into group dynamics through the following steps. The first is ability to differentiate between observation or fact and evaluation. And it was the Indian philosopher Krishnamurti who said that being able to observe without evaluation is the highest form of human intelligence. So we teach kids to differentiate between facts, like the shared reality that both parties of the conflict could observe, and their evaluations. The second step is to be able to connect to their feelings. What do they feel about what has happened? And we offer them the basically new vocabulary that is very seldom used in real life. And this could be a feeling of sadness or joy or helplessness or enthusiasm or despair, etc., etc. So when children start to operate with these concepts, and especially when they are angry or they're experiencing very high temperature of emotions, the moment they can name it, part of this energy already settles, and they can continue in a more peaceful way. The third step in NVC is being able to define the need that is satisfied or not satisfied, and that stands behind the feeling that you have. And it's a very interesting process of teaching children the needs vocabulary. In NVC, it is said that the roots of our feelings are our needs. If they are satisfied, we experience positive feelings. If they are not satisfied, we experience negative feelings. So that could be a need for safety or connection or friendship, or the need for, could be also some physical needs like food or liquid. But usually there are more abstract concepts that are universal for all human beings. Like we all have a need for community, for peace, for physical and emotional safety, etc., etc. And the fourth step in NVC that we teach children and adults as well is the request, the concrete constructive request about how we can make life and world a better place. Like what exactly you can do to me in order to make our lives better. And this is very short and primitive version of NVC. However, you can spend years going deeper and deeper into it. And nonviolent communication teaches self-connection and self-care, to connect to my own feelings and needs at the moment, and different strategies that I might choose to satisfy them, and understanding that this very person can be only my favorite strategy, but it's not the only one to satisfy my needs. It also teaches to connect better to other people. It teaches perfect mediation skills to the level of competence when, if, for example, there are schools that teach children NVC from the first grade, 6 years, and if children have a conflict, they do not need a special mediator. They choose one child that didn't see the situation, so he's neutral, and the only thing that he has to do is to observe how two parties are using 4 steps. So basically, it's not very high-skilled, mediation skills. It's when they all have practiced the 4 steps, he just observes them doing their work and creates the safety container when it can happen. And NVC, it's very, at the moment, it's proved facts that when we introduce nonviolent communication to organizations, doesn't matter what is the age of people in this organization, it contributes a lot to trust building and to effectiveness. So both the business processes and the learning processes become much more, nourishing and efficient.
Yeah, thank you. A really clear overview. I would say that within the organizations I've worked in, I've seen small parts of that happen, but I don't think I've seen anywhere that systematically works through those kind of connections to your feelings and really a high resolution of what you envision is the need. I think, a lot of great food for thought that I can take back with me into the classroom, and I'll do a little more research in this area for sure. I wanted to, yes, go ahead.
There is
sorry.
a beautiful book, if I may recommend, by Marshall Rosenberg called Language of Life, Nonviolent Communication. And also there are a number of books. This is the Russian version of it. And the outlook is the same in English. You can look it up on Amazon. And there are a lot of beautiful books created by himself and his followers. One of them is Life Enriching Education. It's about bringing nonviolent communication to education. For parents, it's Parenting from Your Heart. And for another book for parents and NVC based is Respectful Kids, Respectful Parents. So there are a number of wonderful pieces of literature created by Marshall and his followers that explain in a very detailed way with very concrete exercises on how to bring NVC to classes and families.
Fantastic, wonderful. I have maybe two more points. I'm not sure if they're really questions, but I was interested to hear your description of the ranking of teachers, and that you had a teacher who may be ranked within the top 10 within the Ukraine. Mm-hmm. For me, this is something that I guess we don't really have in Britain. We do have, I guess, Teacher of the Year awards, and we always hear about maybe one or two teachers here and there. What's your kind of feeling on the idea of, say, ranking teachers in this way?
Oh,
and is it clear what they're being ranked on?
Yeah. First of all, this initiative takes place in Ukraine in frame of the Global Teachers Prize Awards that take place in Dubai every year. And Ukraine has joined this movement only last year. I cannot elaborate very accurately on the parameters on how the teachers are being evaluated, but these parameters are international because there are certain similarities that have to be in order to be able to evaluate teachers from different countries. What I can say that this process is extremely creative. We are very friends with the authors, or not like leaders of this movement. They are not authors. This is the NGO that has joined this movement in the name of Ukraine. What I can say is that it's a great tool to bring attention to teachers as a profession and challenges and problems that the teachers are facing. When the society starts to discuss and starts to look into these questions on how to rank them, and starts to vote and starts to watch the TV shows where teachers are performing with the sample lessons or giving interviews, this creates a lot of waves, a lot of new vibrations in society. Because 3-4 years ago, when I was sharing with people that I'm planning to make an NGO, to create an NGO that will help teachers grow, people were literally saying, I mean, you do not have anything to do? Like, you have too much free time? What's happening? So at the moment, there's a huge resonance in society. And a few days ago, Paul Pshenichka, the teacher of the year that won the contest last year and then traveled to Dubai to participate in an international contest, he had his 8 minutes in the Ukrainian parliament. And parliamentarians were standing and applauding on their feet. So, you know, two things at the same time: whether we have to bring this ambition paradigm into teachers' preparation and professional development. I think at the point where our society is, it is very important. How integral are these parameters, and how we can foster more wholeness in these processes of choosing this kind of teachers, or inviting teachers of all kinds of backgrounds to participate and to make this process as open and as integral as possible. This is another question. I think this is also the evolution that will be happening in the nearest years.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think we are very skeptical in Britain of ranking and measuring teachers. And so to take it almost to the other extreme of have the teachers on TV interviewed and performing is wild. But I can see that there's definitely some value maybe within a society that says, we're already doing everything really well. What is there to change? Why don't you have something better to do? And then, of course, I can see it would be an excellent way to bring those conversations to the table. Thanks. I guess my other the thing that kind of piqued my interest was that you're in a country with that's experienced a lot of instability, and as you're talking about a potential need for more leadership, you have all of these opportunities for meaningful education and action that we ironically are trying to get in our schools in, say, Japan or Britain, but in a very settled maybe state, it's actually much harder to give your students a chance for action. Are there any schools that you've worked with within the Ukraine that you feel are really leading this kind of movement of setting up the students to make real meaningful change within the communities and the nation as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. And these kind of schools are now emerging. And I'm not sure I would like to give the names at the moment, but I would gladly share it if it is needed. One of the, but basically this is something very typical to the transition economy. And this is one of the advantages, actually, because your societies are much more stable, and at the same time they give the framework, they give the structure. Like, you go to the kindergarten, then you go to school, then you go to the college or university, and it's more or less forecasted how it will be in 4 or 5 years. In our case, my children, can you imagine? my daughter has changed 9 schools. And it's not the one of the reasons is because we've been traveling, because the work that my husband had, we had to travel because of that. At the same time, she also changed 2 schools here. And I was looking into it very attentively on whether these are wise steps to do and the reasons why we're doing this. I imagine one day she will give a TED talk or something like that. She's 11 years old, like she's a 6th grader, like your children. And looking at her, I assume that her level of maturity is much, much beyond the average. She's now studying in one of the alternative schools that's acting a lot. She is the editor-in-chief of their school newspaper, and she is covering the regional problems, the ecological problems of the place where the school is, interviewing the ecologists, writing articles, making photos of the trash cans, and trying to have impact. I imagine it wouldn't be possible in the times when I was at school. And with the social media, when quite mature consciousness of very early the biological age gets exposure through social media and through other channels, it's very beautiful to observe. And of course, it's much more easy when the society is not that structured as I imagine it is in Britain. So there are advantages and disadvantages everywhere. And one of the things I would like to suggest to think about to both of you guys is that if one day you would imagine we could create an initiative around the students' exchange and, inviting some Japanese students to come to Ukraine for 2 weeks and to study in one of the schools and see how it works here.
Yeah.
Sending the Ukrainian students there, or to Belgium, or wherever you would imagine. And this is also an invitation to the listeners of this podcast. I've created an NGO. This is the second NGO that I have. Sorry, I initiated, because it's the members that have it. It's called Open Chata. Chata has 2 meanings. One is the Ukrainian old house, and another chata is this scarf that the Buddhist monks have, and that the Dalai Lama gives it to the famous guests like Richard Gere and others. The Open Chata is about opening our hearts and homes to people from all over the world. And at the moment it functions in Ukraine, and we foster the student exchange between different schools and children living in the families, local families within Ukraine. But we wish that one day we can also open our chatas to the international guests. So just to let you know, if you would be interested and curious, I'll be gladly, share.
Yeah, certainly, for sure. That's been really wonderful speaking to you. I think your positivity and the lack of fear in a place that potentially, has had a lot of really major changes over your lifetime, and just to speak to someone who's experienced those things but has such wonderful positivity and matched with that obviously incredible knowledge of of how integral theory and those practices can work with education. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you. Thank you very much.
And the one last piece I'd like to tie up, the thing that really emerged from this conversation for me was the idea of school serving something beyond the country that it is in. Brendan and I, a lot of our talks have centered around the idea of school being in service of three main things within state-funded schooling. So one being occupational preparation, getting the kids ready for the workforce, but added to that is usually the idea of the workforce of our country, and to get our students ready to be citizens. And again, the hidden implication there, citizens within our country, and usually to a much smaller degree to help this person as an individual develop themselves, but usually again within the norms and values of our country. Whereas what you pointed out with, a large portion of Ukrainians leaving the country and entering other economies, other societies, there is perhaps also needed this shift towards the idea of schools aren't just preparing people for our country anymore. We're in a much more global world, a world where these students will be traveling, working abroad, working in different places, or even just working closely with so many people from other countries. You've really highlighted something new that hasn't been on my radar, which is, yes, we're preparing students for society, citizenry, and for a life within themselves, but globally now, or internationally. And that's one piece of the conversation that hasn't quite updated. So thank you for that.
Rob, thank you very much for emphasizing it. I think we as teachers and as leaders are the first ones who have to start to think that there are no children that are not ours, that are someone's. They are all our children, the children of this global world. And would it be children who are, children of refugees from Syria, or refugees from the eastern Ukraine, or people coming and visiting us from America and Japan, in Europe, because some teachers see value in showing their children from the Western world the resilience that can be manifested by people in other parts of the world. We all can learn something from each other. And I truly believe that this kind of attitude, if we inculcate it to the new generation of teachers and educational leaders, it might bring a lot of good, and it might bring the changes that we aspire for in our integral community.
At the beginning of our conversation, you provided a beautiful visual example of saying, as these ideas spread, it's like mushrooms growing within the forest. I'm excited to know what kind of new mushrooms this conversation grows and develops for people all over the world listening to this conversation. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, both of you. Brendan, it's a great pleasure to get to know you.
Thank you.
Mostly be hearing Rob during the podcasts, during his introductions, and it's a great pleasure to get to know you today.
Thank you very much. It's great to meet you. Hopefully we'll have many more conversations.
Yeah, me too.
If this episode of Reinventing Education was insightful or useful to you, feel free to reach out and connect to us on social media. We enjoy having your perspective. Join the conversation about what reinventing education might look like. Feel free to find us on our Facebook page, Reinventing Education Podcast, and join the discussions there. From Brendan and myself, thanks for joining us.